The Saga of ShaHaNon, Book 2, Emperors and Exiles, Chapter 1, Guests, Part 3. They moved to the fire in the yard, where a man who was in his prime, despite the gray in his hair, offered Ivan a slab of his own meat. Ivan took the choice cut. At least they had saved that for him.
"I'm Dorak,"
the man said.
Ivan
said with a nod.
"You have built a solid dwelling here,
Durak said, admiring it.
as true as any I have ever seen."
There are reasons the old ways were formed.
Ivan said as he took a bite.
Who are you people?
He asked.
"We are the clan of Kenar."
Durak said.
Durak is Bulin's son.
One of the younger men said, very proud of that fact for whatever reason. Ivan grunted.
I do not recall a clan called Kenar in the songs of old. I do not know Kenar, and I assume this Bulin you talk of is the man in my house.
"You do not know of Kenar?"
Durak asked, a bit surprised.
"Tell us a story."
He said to a very young man in the company. The young man was little more than a boy, his cheeks only beginning to grow a beard, and this was likely his first fire away from home with the men as a man. He shifted and pushed his hood back to show his neatly kept hair, his fine braids and small gold beads that held them in place. He was, without a doubt, the son of someone important. He cleared his throat and stepped a little closer.
5 spans or so ago, or 500 years by the way of the counting of Pert, the day itself is recorded on the stones of the North Tundra. The king ruled in grace and power, loved by the gods, and father to all Azir. In those days, Azir found itself in a war with Jerome, the Black Heart. Jerome came with lies and demons to assault the men of Azir. Against him stood the mighty prince and heir to all of Azir, Ishhaven. He went to war with the Black Heart and was targeted by the demons of the foul betrayer of Pert. With temptations of gold, of pleasure and power, men were seduced by the evil, and they began to slip and turn against the true of Azir. So terrible was the seduction that lies were spread, and the order was given to Ishhaven's own brother and eldest son to kill him. Of all the champions Jerome had brought down in his quest to conquer the world, Ishhaven scared him more than any other. Powers moved. The army of Jerome found its way to the hidden home of the prince, while he, the son of the bear, faced the darkness openly and crushed one army after another. Traitors slipped into his home and murdered his wife. She was butchered like a troll and left for him to find. His little children were chopped apart and staked about the fields. All but one, his smallest daughter, was hauled away to be used against her grandfather, the bear of Azir, king of all Azirans.
The young storyteller fell silent, and all the men put their hands over their hearts in a show of utter grief and sympathy for a kinsman.
Grief and anger filled Ishhaven, and he went into a rage, burning his own village, hunting the traitors and ripping them asunder in the very streets of the city. Not understanding what had happened and thinking Ishhaven had gone mad, his brother moved to fulfill the orders he had wished not to obey before. Ishhaven, in drunken grief and rage, stayed late with a young woman, then stumbled out into the fields. His most loyal kinsman followed him, and thus he was apart from his army and nearly alone in the hills. Not 100 miles from here, Ishhaven met the army that moved to attack his camp and his men. Singled out and driven apart, he found himself face to face with his own brother. He had no choice but to kill him.
Again, there was a powerful pause. Ivan felt sickened at hearing this story.
Ishhaven turned then against the commander of this army, the commander who had turned traitor against Azir and had led the king's men under the dark orders of Jerome. They fought, and Ishhaven won. It was not until the man's helm fell away and Ishhaven saw his own son that he realized how deeply the darkness had crept into Azir, and with whom he fought. In grief, he held his eldest son in his arms, trying to save him, weeping, but there was no hope.
The men about the fire fell silent and bowed their heads.
Ishhaven fought no more. He stayed down on his knees, sobbing in grief and pain, for in his heart the death of his last son was as if Azir itself had fallen and died. In the smoke and the storm of the battle, Ishhaven vanished. His army was crushed except for a few who were strong enough, fast enough, or clever enough to flee. Among them was the woman he had spent the night with. She bore a son, Kenar. Under the guard of the last of the true army and men of Ishhaven, Kenar was raised to be a prince of Azir, as of old, and so still he rules, The young daughter of Prince Ishhaven was taken before her grandfather and tortured until he surrendered, weeping on the floor, begging Jerome for mercy for his people. In time, she escaped and fled the house of her grandfather, back to the hills of her father, and she stands as living testimony to the truth of what I have said.
The daughter of the prince survived?
Ivan asked doubtfully. He was a little surprised how much of the story was known and true, but he doubted the bloodline. He knew politics and how it was played. It is better to fake the line than have the line die. Create a king if you must, and this seemed a good way to do it. People needed hope more than truth.
The magic used on her changed her forever, but the gods blessed her and made her pain a blessing. She sits now in the house, seeress of the true men of Azir.
What daughter?
Ivan asked, still in doubt.
He had more than one.
We do not speak her name.
Durak said.
It is tagged into the magics of demons, and they come upon us if we do. They seek her to this day.
Why?
Ivan asked.
There is only so much an old woman can do, even if she truly is a seer and daughter of the prince.
They glanced around at each other a moment. Then the young woman spoke.
The Black Heart fears that she will raise Ishhaven from the dead. It is said he shall crawl forth from the dark tunnels and take flight as the raven. He shall return to us, and she shall call his name, and the earth shall shake. The armies of old shall rise, and Ishhaven shall march unto his father and drive the invaders from Azir. Only by her will the men of the hills know the truth of who is true king. She, and she alone, will be able to call forth the bear.
Ivan almost snorted. These men believed this truly and deeply. They clung to the hope, needing to believe Azir was not dead. He slowly looked around at them. He was surrounded by Azirans, all of them looking as if they had stepped out of his own youth. They were armed against Jerome, and they were looking for their lost prince, him. They were waiting for him, praying for him to return. Even ShaHaNon had gone back to his people of Norwood and retaken his throne. Pressure and sadness filled Ivan's chest. He stared at the fire as the men talked of other things, laughing a little and passing about the ale. Ivan's mind went back to his lost friends, the nights at the fire, talking softly, laughing and hiding against the cold. He drew a shaky breath at the loss of them, faces he recalled at times so clearly, at other times like a dream he could not recapture. He looked down at his hand as the woman slipped hers into his. It had been a long time since he had been touched by an Aziran, and longer since the touch of a woman had been so sincere.
Your heart aches,
she said softly.
Is there someone you wish were here?
10,000.
He answered her with scarcely hidden anguish in his voice.
At the Battle of Clun, there were 10,000 veteran warriors of Azir, and they lost. What hope do a few hundred leaderless, fatherless exiles have against Jerome? Azir fell long ago.
They say in Norwood there is a king.
The young storykeeper spoke up over the talking. The others went quiet to hear him. He watched Ivan carefully.
They say a vampire lord escaped the fires of hell and took back the throne of Norwood. They say he has held that throne for 4,000 years, and that Jerome cannot even make it past the forest into the heart of Norwood. They say Pert has stopped thinking of Norwood as part of Pert at all. If a single man can crawl out of hell and defy the traitor, why can't our prince come back to us? Why can't he do the same, but with his own sons at his side and stand in defiance of the darkness? All of Azir calls for him. In secret, even the city people weep for him and beg our gods, Pert's gods, all gods for mercy. Do you think 4,000 years necessary for us to wait? Are not 5 spans long enough for us to wait for him? Yes or no, we will wait. Azir cannot be Azir without the Golden Bear. We will not rise up until we know there will be no war over who is king. The gods alone decide that.
Ivan couldn't argue with the young man. He had nothing to say, but his heart ached. The men had all gone silent and watched him.
Tell me, young man,
Ivan said.
You seem very convinced of things. What would you tell me if I said that I knew Ishhaven lived?
I would ask if he knew he had sons in Azir.
Do you have any idea how old 500 years is? Do you know what that does to a man?
Bullen is nearly as old, and his father is just that, so yes, I see what it looks like.
You honestly think a man that old could lead you to some great victory?
Ivan asked.
Ishhaven was nearly 2 spans when the war came to Azir. He'd be a very old man now.
The young man smiled a suddenly very charming and handsome smile that reminded Ivan at once of Travis, in a rather unsettling and painful way. He felt as if he was being tested by the gods, and this young man was the vessel of it.
Do you truly think that it would matter? Our gods are not the mystic swirls of energy the Pertons call God. Our gods are as real as the cold winds, as solid as stone, and as present as the air we breathe. If he came back to us, do you not think our gods would bless him and renew him?
Ivan actually chuckled at the young man.
No, I do not. I think the gods would demand that the men of Azir free Azir to prove their worthiness of them. If not, the gods will rule this land as they always have and always will, with or without us. Our gods do not need us nor require worship. They are as solid as stone, as old as the terra under our feet, and they watch Grunda as a child might watch a bubbling stream. They are timeless and powerful. This little war we find ourselves in is as bugs in your ear on a summer day.
He chuckled and shook his head.
None of us are worthy of their attention. The question that remains, are you, any of you, worthy of the bloodline of the Golden Bear? Like the line of Armond, our kings hold the blood of a god, and so link their souls beyond the realms of men. Do you have any idea what would happen to such a bloodline if the darkness of Jerome's armies got hold of it? Look to Norwood, and the king who has a heart of clay and flesh of a ghoul, the soul of a saint, and the power of a demon. You think your line of Kennar could hold itself against the evil that did that to someone so powerful as Tyrardel von Armund? I don't. It is better Ishhaven remain in the darkness, just in case Kennar truly is his. If Jerome knew there was a line, he would march an army into Azir and kill every man, woman, and child as food for the hounds of hell.
You talk as a man who knows.
Bolin said from where he had come to the fire.
You know Jerome, do you?
I have stood on the hills of Forbidden Lands and looked out over his army.
Ivan scowled at Bolin, and the creeping feeling that he should know the man.
I have witnessed magics and warp storms that made the barrier shudder and crack. I have been chained to the floor and been beaten simply for being an Azeran. Oh yes, I know Jerome, and I see no man here who has any hope of standing against his darkness.
There you are wrong,
Bolin said.
For you do not see any one man here. You see Azir before you, and despite all, we still stand, and we still defy. We still reject his dark evil. As a great wizard retreats his mind to his sanctuary, we retreat to the hills. I know you not, but I think you have been alone too long and know not the way of the Aziran warrior.
Ivan shook his head and slipped his hand from the woman's.
You have lived off stories and hopes of a bloodline I see no proof of.
You are a bold man,
Bolin said.
I will say no more. This is your house, but I see no reason why you have any right to talk so to me. On the sheer fact of my age alone, you should have some respect.
Go back inside,
Ivan said firmly.
Watch that boy breathe, touch his warm skin, and think.
He tapped the side of his head.
Take your arrogance, and when the storm breaks, get out of my house. Take your arrogance and prideful blindness, and do not wander back into my hills. Indeed, you know me not, and you shall not.
He turned from them and went back to his bed of grass. The ram stepped up in a defensive stance to block any from getting to him, and Via sat vigil as Ivan threw himself down to try to sleep. He almost laughed at suddenly understanding how ShaHaNon felt arguing with Wirion, but humor was lost to anger and frustration.